Ngaio Merrick from Lois Holdings, welcome, and Ross from Canada, First Angel Network. This is Human Resources Finding, Assessing, and Managing Personnel.
Thank you for having me here and inviting us to put this program on. Thank you, Zeus, for bringing me down. No thanks for having me follow Brian. That's not fun at all. So we want to talk about the Angel's Guide to Startups, being able to assess and manage their human resources, because that's where a lot of their money gets spent, our money gets spent, and we want to make sure they're spending it in the right way. A few years ago, made an investment in a company that they walked through the door, and immediately I didn't like this guy, this entrepreneur. There was just something about him. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I didn't like him. So at the end of his pitch, I said, well, I think your business model is not very good. It needs some work, and your management team is terrible. He was the management team. He was, that was it. So, but I'm Canadian, so we're kind of, gentle with things. So he came back 6 months later and he says, here's my new business model. And I said, wow, this could work. This looks good. I said, but your management team still sucks. And so he came back 6 months after that, and he walks in the door with a dream team. They were amazing group of senior executives that were going to support his business going forward. We said, well, okay, you got the business model, you got a great product, you've got a good team, let's give it a shot. So we put, I think, about $500,000 into this venture, and a week after the check cleared, the dream team all quit, en masse. I said, we can't work with him, he's a jerk. I was right. And I didn't even get a shirt out of it, though. I mean, that's the problem, okay? So the Angel HR model, so it involves a number of things you have to do well as we're going through this. First is you have to be able to assess the person and the talent within the organization. You've got to make sure they're aligned with what the Angels want to achieve out of this exit or this organization. We want to make sure that they've got adequate, not just adequate, really good governance in place, so that I've seen people come in with their board makeup is 3 senior managers, a founder, and 2 outside people. Well, that's just a management meeting, and we don't want that. We want independent directors. We've had to fire CEOs most of the time, a bit too late, but that's what you need in your governance. And finally, you need to be engaged with the company on an ongoing basis as you move forward, and so that you can be there when they need help. How many here have had the experience or understand that when they stop calling you, they're in trouble? Is that correct? Exactly. So we want to look at it from 2 sides, one pre-investment and the other post-investment. So pre-investment, this is problem prevention. And you prevent problems through your term sheets and all the other tools that we have. Because it's far more expensive to problem solve. And typically you're problem solving with your money and you're problem preventing with theirs before we get this thing going. We're betting on the jockey, so therefore you've got to understand the jockey. What's their motivation? What's their skill level? What's their ability to lead? And after the investment, we want to maintain engagement and ensure that good governance is in place to improve the odds of having a success. So why does the jockey matter? Because typically it's a long journey. And the other thing that is important is that we are creating a relationship with this person. So when we invest in a company, we become their business partners, and we expect to be treated like business partners and we expect them to treat us like business partners, or we treat them like business partners. All these companies, what did they have in common? They made a pivot. And that requires some serious leadership as this company unfolds. And they have to know when to do it. Because that's, you spend too long riding a dead horse, you know, you're not going to win the race. So how do you pick a jockey? Obviously, earlier in the process of the company, the evolution of the company, they're really important. Less than 1 in 10 of Y Combinator companies succeed. I think that's what. That the serial entrepreneurship, have they done it before? And one of the things that we found in Atlantic Canada is that the problem we have is acquiring talent and acquiring people that can have that experience to take the company forward. And because our market's small, when the companies, if they're going to succeed, they typically move to, well, they say rats go where the cheese is. So where's the cheese is in Silicon Valley and other places. And so they're tempted, and often they do move if they're getting to that level of success, especially if there's venture money coming from south of the border. So what that does for us, though, is they leave and they don't come back because the weather's better, for one thing. So it's important that you create an environment where the entrepreneurs will come back. We have one company that the entrepreneurs were a husband-wife team. They were making tons of money in the U.S., but they came back to take on a technology out of their hometown in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and now it's one of the most successful companies in our portfolio. But they took a huge risk bringing their family back to New Brunswick. So past attempts are important, and your ability to build a team is really important.
So Ross mentioned that Y Combinator, 1 out of 10 of their companies their entrepreneurs were successful. When they analyzed that 1 out of 10, they found out that almost all of the were dual entrepreneurs, co-founders. And there are 2 reasons why a founder can't find a co-founder. One is that he literally doesn't have the persuasive power to bring a friend into business with him, and that should be a red flag. And the other, and perhaps slightly more common, is that it's such a good business and it's such a good deal. He's going to be so successful and so rich, he doesn't want to share it with anybody. And that should also be a red flag. Yes. So when I went to Israel, there's a bunch of people who were on the innovation delegation to Israel. We heard repeatedly from all of the venture capitalists in Israel that they choose co-founders. Reasons for that: bit of insurance. If something goes wrong, you've still got another co-founder around. But the co-founders must have a relationship before they start the company. So that when things get tough, and it will get tough, there's a friendship base and a loyalty to stick in there for a little bit longer. And interesting to hear Ross say that he has a husband and wife team who's really successful, because the absolute golden rule for all of Y Combinator is no husband-wife teams. Most of the venture capitalists that I spoke to in Israel, no husband-wife teams, and no mother-son teams for the same reason.
Hartford. I was thinking, Brian, if this is really all about sex, how come my portfolio isn't way bigger?
I've got an answer, but I can't give it to you.
No. So it's about leadership. And these are some of the hazards of leadership, but it always starts with one person. And that's the person. We had 2 co-CEOs in a company that we invested in, and 2 co-founders. Has anybody ever actually seen a true situation where it worked?
Yep.
1. 2. Okay. All right. You have to be contrarian. So we had an investment where there was the lead alpha person of the co-CEOs, the co-founders, and he pitched, did a great job. Everybody was like, sign me up, right? And again, 4 months after the start of the company, this guy gets in a big fight with his partner, and off he goes. And fortunately, we had his shares in escrow, so we were able to get them back from him. But and that company's still doing well, thank goodness. So try and look at the characteristics of these people. What's their history? Have they sold stuff at a local market when they were kids? These kinds of things. What is the evidence of leadership? Do they have the ability to listen and dismiss things that are not relevant to the business? So that's really important. And finally, are they self-aware?
So we take that one stage further and say that all the characteristics of an entrepreneur that you're looking for can be summarized into two things. Are they self-aware and are they coachable? And that gives you the basis to form trust. You have to be self-aware to be coachable, but there are a few people who are coachable and not self-aware, which means that they listen to the last person they spoke with. So we search for self-awareness first and coachability second. And Cecilia asked me a really good question last night. She goes, that's great, but how do you test for self-awareness? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because what we do, very good question, Cecilia. What we do is we run our entrepreneurs through a series of assessments. And the reason we do that is not so that we can say you passed or you failed, but so that we can know more about them, so that we know what support they need, and so that we know who we're dealing with. Because in New Zealand, we pay a lot of lip service to I invest in the people, I invest in the people. And then DD comes around and we spend 3 weeks looking at the product, 3 weeks looking at the market, 5 weeks looking at finance, and we have a couple of cups of coffee with the guy and we go, he seems all right, he seems a nice guy, might invest in him. And I'm suggesting that there is an ability to do better DD where we put more depth into the thing that we place the most importance on. Can you flip, please? Yeah. So to be really clear, it's not a selector. There is only one filter for me when we're investing. And I think, Brian, you summarized it beautifully by saying there aren't enough smart children in the world. So the only filter that I have is an IQ test. And if you're less than 100 on the IQ test, I think there are probably more fish in the sea I'd rather swim with. Not interested in dealing with that. So we run them through an IQ test, and that's it for filters. The rest of it, and it doesn't have to be for everybody. I'm an intellectual snob. I like people to be fairly bright, but it doesn't have to be for everybody. We also run them through a lateral thinking test, and you've heard the conversation from Ross about pivoting. Lateral thinking tells us how likely they are to be able to solve problems in a way that isn't conventional. So that's a really important factor for us. But we also look at their ability with numbers. I like to say one person on the team must have an ability with numbers because you guys are going to have to follow budgets and generate sales and build business models, or that's the support we'll put around you when we invest in you. But we know going in whether or not that's a hole in the current offering of the company. We also look at their motivation. What drives these people? Are they driven by working with people, with data, with things, or are they driven by dealing with concepts? Next slide. So this is what we get out of it, and it's pretty simple. But what it gives us an idea of is, back to Brian's point, is how's this person going to execute? How can we measure how likely they are to execute? If they're not motivated by people, data, or things, I would suggest they're probably not that motivated. So how likely are they to execute? If they've got a really low ability with numbers and words and shapes, how likely are they to get things done? Okay. So in addition to looking at their motivations, we do a personality analysis. This is a great way, Brian, to prevent the deception of hiring someone because you feel like they're just like you. Do this yourselves, and then do this to your teams, and see if the only reason you're comfortable is because it feels like I'm at home. It's a very good way of doing it. We look at whether they are, and it's a continuum line, it's not a pass or fail. Are they cooperative or are they competitive? Are they innovative or are they conventional? Are they reactive or are they organized? If I've got somebody who is innovative, reactive, self-sufficient, and restless, I'm going to ask about how well they play in a team. So it gives you a bunch more information than just the continuum lines that you deal with. We used to try and do this. We've got over 400 of these assessments, so we have a pretty good database and we know kind of which people we want to work with now. But one of the things we used to do is try and put an ideal CEO profile together, and then we're going to match this person, and they can be a 60% or a 70% match. So to do that, I analysed all of the success we've had and the lack of success, because we've got 14 that we've killed, with our CEOs, and I came up with the conclusion that there is no CEO personality profile. So if you've got one, I'd love to have it. But you get a lot of information about who you're dealing with.
You have a field spec?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a kill spec?
A kill spec? Yeah, less than 100 on the IQ scale. That's my kill. That's the only kill I have. I don't want to deal with people who aren't smart enough to think on their feet. Okay, next slide. So this is what it looks like. It's nothing, it's not, earth-shattering. It's just a continuum line. But this particular person is emotional and restless and relatively spontaneous and relatively reactive. So I'd expect to see some of that on an entrepreneur. I'd expect to see some of that behavior. And none of that really surprises me. Next slide, you.
So what do we look for? Notice on here, there's no passion. Brian? I had to check first. I didn't want to. It's okay. But you want someone that's confident, that is able to stand up and look other investors in the eyes and other CEOs and suppliers and everybody else, and be able to explain their businesses. They have to be creative, analytical, judgmental. They have to be all of these things. So there's all kinds of tests you can do for this. There's a thinking test that says, are you a green thinker? That means you're creative. Or you're an analytical thinker, which says you're red, or judgmental, that says you're blue. And you really have to be all three. You have to have an element of all three, or at least understand what your strength is and what you tend to do. Sometimes people are just solid blue. They're quick to judge, and that's it. And they can make mistakes very fast. Analytical, they just spend time analyzing everything. They won't make a decision until it's too late usually. Creative thinkers, they're off in the sky thinking about the latest, greatest, next thing they're going to do instead of focusing on what they've got. So are they focused? Can they handle uncertainty? Are they able to delegate? Are they able to give up? I mean, we've got an investment we just done twice now, and this guy is he's fabulous, but he needs 48-hour days. He really does, because he just won't let go anything. And he spends a lot of time putting out fires, days after they happened. So it really doesn't make us confident in that leader. The technology is amazing. Are they independent? Do they promote their knowledge? Do they give it away? One of the things as an angel investor I learned a long time ago is that you cannot give away what you do not have. So you have to, as you are looking at your role, engaging with these entrepreneurs, what is it that you have that you can give to that entrepreneur? Because it's got to be a two-way street. Do they see the big picture, or is everything just focused on their little part of the world and that's it? Can they build relationships? And are they willing to take risks? Have they taken risks in their own lives? Have they taken risks with their own money in this venture?
So to look at one of Ross's comments is you've got to have a little bit of everything in you. And Rudy, let me give more credence to your response, but I wanted to get to this slide, which is I look for red flags. So if somebody is a 1 or a 10, it means that the behavior is really extreme, which means you probably don't have a lot of the other part of that continuum line in your behavior. And some of the behavior that we've seen from CEOs who we've had to shoot has been where they've got 4 1s and 4 10s. And you look at that and think, well, there's not much moderation in this chap, and that becomes quite difficult. Also, self-awareness. I often take the personality sheet and I don't show it to the entrepreneur, and I ask them, how do you think you are on a continuum scale of cooperative to competitive? And they'll tell you either what they think they are or what they think you want to hear, which gives you a very good indication of their self-awareness. Well, we talked about co-founders, and our experience is that people forgive an awful lot of personality differences. I recognize, Trevor, that apart from the fact that you're famous because you're sitting at the front, you have an awful lot of expertise in data, detail, finance. I don't have that. I respect that. That's going to be good. I'm going to look forward to working with Trevor. What people don't respect is a difference in approach to work. So the most important part of the assessment that we do is for the initial team, it might be 2, it might be 3, it might be 5, is we assess their approach to work. And we look at things like, do they live to work or do they work to live? Are they people who follow the rules or do they question everything? Because I can tell you that if you follow all the rules and your co-founder questions everything, your level of resentment in dealing with that person on a day-to-day basis will build. And companies split apart, co-founders split because of resentment. They just don't want to work with that person anymore. He's a prick, as you put it. It's all about the differences in approach to work. We look at whether they are daring or whether they're cautious. We look at whether they are accommodating or forceful in their communication. And communication is one of the very key factors for success in early stage companies. So if you have someone who is a dominant, forceful, particularly if they're a 10 in the communication style, and you have somebody else who's a 1 or a 2, they are going to struggle with that. We look at whether their approach to new ventures is cautious or optimistic. That's when you hear the comment, yeah, he's down on everything. Can never get anything through him, man. He drives me nuts. Oh, she just thinks the world's full of rose-tinted glasses and that everything's going to succeed. And that's where you get some build-up and some difference. So we do a full approach to it. If you flip to the next slide for me. We do an approach to work, and this is one person's approach to work. And then we sit down with all of our people and we say, okay, the likely point of conflict in this company is going to be approach to new ventures or perhaps a careful versus daring. We then have the opportunity to sit down with these founders before we put any money on the table and say to them, and I've done this, I've sat down, I've said, so looking at your profiles, it looks like you might be a little bit conflicted over this. And every time the response is, yeah, he drives me nuts. So it's great. Now we can have that conversation and say, if this is an area you know is going to give conflict, how do we make sure we don't head into conflict with that? How do we improve our chances of successful co-founder businesses that aren't going to split? And this is one of the tools that we use to do that.
So the thing that I see is that being an entrepreneur is stressful. Has anybody read the article about 2 years ago in The Economist where they said basically that, after 13 or 12 years as an entrepreneur, most of them would have been better off if they'd just gotten a job. It's very stressful. They lose their families, they lose their homes, they lose their friends, they sleep under their desk. And so dealing with somebody who's under that much stress, you want to be able to ensure that they can handle that stress. Stress, by the way, is that conflict between the brain and the body that wants to just choke the living shit out of somebody. So that's what creates stress. Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay.
So
back to you.
The assessment that we do is just one of the tools that we use doing due diligence for people, and it doesn't replace the other three, which are the talk, type, and time. So everyone has LinkedIn. I've got access to 1.8 million people. When I'm interviewing an entrepreneur, I don't give the references that they give me a call because I know what they're going to say. I go and connect with people that I know on LinkedIn, and I ring them, what do you know about Sam? And I get a lot of information that they perhaps weren't going to tell me. I also think that, especially in New Zealand, because we're quite a small nation, that you really do need to do your Google searches and look on the company's office and find out not whether or not what they've told you is correct, but find out what they haven't told you. Find out what they used to be involved in that they've omitted from their CV, for example. I get some very good information that way. And the golden rule, spend time with them. Find out if you like the person, because if you're an active angel, you are going to spend time with them. So that's all part of the DD process that we do. So post-investment, the way you start off by minimizing risk is through the term sheet. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because Josh was going to be talking about it later this afternoon. But important things is making sure that your rights are there, make sure that the founders put their shares in escrow, and they don't come out until they've hit certain milestones. And it was because we had those founders' shares in escrow, when that co-founder broke up, we were able to take his shares back. And so that was important, because why would you let this person wander off and still own 30% of the company? So we have one of those where the ex-pissed-off co-founder does still own 30% of the company and is preventing that company from doing what it needs to grow at the moment.
Yeah. So engage with the entrepreneurs. Decide who amongst the investors on your angel group are going to be front and center with that organization. What role are they going to have? Are they going to be advisory board or board member? How long are you expecting them to keep up the relationship? Because we get worn out. And I've been on way too many boards for far too long. And it is very stressful. And understand what the investor needs. So, and this is... So, one of the things that we do in our angel network is we give every investment company, the invested company, a complete governance package. So with our expectations of how they're supposed to behave as a company from this point on, because they've got third-party money into it. So these are some of the things that we put in. We provide guidance going forward on employment contracts. We make sure that those employment contracts have non-compete clauses. We had one company, they came up with a SO2 scrubber for vessels, marine vessels. And it was a small company in Prince Edward Island. They did a test run with it with a small company. I can't tell you the company's name, but their initials are BP. And the BP came and stole the engineer who developed the patent on this and hired him over to the BP and said, do a workaround on your patent. So that company spent $2 million in 3 years fighting that. So it was an incredible waste of time and money. So if they'd had employment contracts and a non-compete clause in that contract with that person, it wouldn't happen. What kind of expertise do they need? What kind of strategic advice do they need? Leverage our contacts and be there for crisis management because there's always going to be one. Employment contracts, you guys have laws. We're going to let Murray's right there. He's a lawyer. Don't say anything bad. He's going to talk a little more about this. So one of the big things that we see, it's a big problem, is that we just got funded, let's hire everybody, you know? And they go out and spend the money, and they don't do it well, because hiring is very difficult to do. As we've said earlier, the talent pool is pretty small in Atlantic Canada, and we've got half the population that you do in New Zealand, so I'm thinking that yours may be just a little bit better.
Twice as small.
Yours is small too?
Twice as small.
Twice as small, okay. So the talent is sparse. It's hard to hire for diversity. And culture is very key. If you got the right people coming together that believe in one another and will work together, very important. And this is one thing I see all the time. You know, they use their titles. It's important because when you got no money, that's about all you can give out, his titles. So we look for, you know, making sure that if somebody is going to be a vice president of whatever in this 10-person startup, that they have the capacity to live up to that title, shall we say. So where are we? Here we are. Again, we talked about, you talked a little bit about this, Brian. This is from the ARI, Angel Resource Institute, on returns study. By the way, in 2009, they did a return study that showed only 50% of the companies, the startup companies, fail, but 50% do. They did one last year. We did one in 2015, and we're up to 70. So we're having a violent agreement, Brian. And so 70% of the companies invested will fail. The other interesting number is that it didn't change from 2009 to 2015, was the fact that 85% of the money you will make will come from 10% of the companies you invest in. And that was what counted. But you can see that the size of the return that you will get goes up with the amount of participation and time you spend with that company. And the last and most important thing between angels and their entrepreneurs is communication. Because without it, you're really doomed. And I know it's really hard to get entrepreneurs to communicate, so we try to set up systems that are good for everybody.
So on that communication side, knowing whether you've got people who communicate in different styles at the beginning helps you put things in place to ensure that that communication is going to be heard as well as spoken. KiwiNet have an offer for everybody in the room. KiwiNet are very focused on generating commercialisation out of CRIs and universities, and they have made the offer that everybody here can have 10 free assessments. So I recommend you test yourselves and some of the team that you're working with so that you can get a feel for how that may be able to add to your own due diligence.
Don't test yourself, Brian. We know you're great.
I'm going to welcome up Murray White from Avid Legal to do a couple of minutes.
Okay, I'm going to keep this short. Talking about employment law, very boring. It's not my speciality, but let's talk about what's relevant for people in this room. Firstly, when we're investing in companies, most of those companies don't have employment agreements in place with their founders. That should be one thing that you get in place as a matter of your investment. Ross had a slide up there before of a couple of things that you should have in it. A couple of things that I'd also point out that weren't there. One is to make sure you've got an IP clause and confidentiality clause. That might have been helpful for your example. The other one is also maybe not relevant for your founders, but when companies are employing, make sure you have a representation in there that the information you've given through the process is true. If you find yourself in the scenario where you've employed somebody and they've misrepresented their experience, it's a very easy clause to use to get rid of them quickly. So something that can be quite useful. Otherwise, the fair processes that you have to go through in New Zealand are really made for big companies and they take a long time. It doesn't really work for growth companies in the early stage, so that can be very useful. What are the most difficult issues? Dealing with CEOs, particularly in early stage companies, because they're often on the board of directors. They've often got shares. So what are some of the things that people in this room can take on board when they're looking at the way that they structure their businesses? Thinking about governance, it's a board matter, your CEO, and don't shy away from it. It's difficult, and you need to have these conversations early and try and head them off. New Zealand culture is such that we usually try and hide away from them. She'll be right, it'll get better. But talk about it and make sure you communicate expectations. Another thing in terms of structuring and governance, set up a remuneration committee with your board and make sure that your CEO is not on it. Many people don't do that, and make sure you set it up early. So you don't set it up just when something arises, but have it there early. Last comment I just want to make is that New Zealand law, in terms of trying to fire somebody, whether it's through performance management, redundancy, etc., is all tied up in process. And so you need to start that process off, and it needs to be a fair process. But most of the time, the reality is we've made our decision. We know that they're not right. You're not starting the process unless you have a reason for it and you're taking the deep play. You need to start that process, and it's a risk mitigation for personal grievances and all the other bad things that happen. But on the side, you also need to know what your negotiation strategy is. You need to know what your rights are if they're a shareholder. You need to know what it might cost to make this problem go away, and most of the time you need to act very quickly for the survival of the company. So just a couple of points to think about when you're on boards and to think early.